Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I have two of my favorite people here in studio with me.
That's a woot woot.
It is a woot woot.
It's 2019. We got to bring that back.
This is Colorado Business Roundtable President Jeff Wasden, the resident woot woot guy.
That's right.
And also Ed Sealover with Denver Business Journal and government reporter. He also reports on beer. Lots of titles for you under there.
Guy.
But you all
raise the roof, sir.
There you go.
Perfect.
I'm not the hip one in the studio.
Perfect.
Yeah. So.
Well, welcome you guys. We are off and running in 2019. Exciting stuff happening in legislation.
Oh
So
my
let's
goodness.
jump
We
in.
can't be any happier. I know we had a chance to do an end of the year review and a look forward to 2019 and just where the Colorado Business Roundtable is at and the excitement, enthusiasm of what we're building. And certainly our relationship with the DBJ and certainly with Ed and the shows and all the stuff we did. We were chatting before we got on air laughing about, how great our shows were, that we have a whole new legislative process, governors and statewide elected officers.
Right.
So
Well, clearly, if
great.
our shows were influencing the listeners, they all love the Democratic candidates across the board.
For sure.
So,
And I'm sure Salem loves hearing that on their network. Right? I don't know if I should have said that, but sure. They lean a little
or
right.
you
Maybe.
wring your hand at the futility of trying to let people decide during a wave election.
Sure,
So,
either
yeah,
or, whatever works. But
I've seen this before, but hopefully the voters were still more educated going in. And
so it's been fascinating to kind of look here as we come in and everyone talks about elections have consequences and we enter this new legislative session and the new governor that's now been sworn in and all of his cabinet appointees that are being put into place. And certainly, as we look from the Business Roundtable with Betsy Marchio to Wedit and Angie over at Department of Higher Ed, and you start looking at these appointments. And we will take the opportunity to publicly congratulate Governor Polis on a lot of his appointments, and I think he's done a phenomenal job. He's not doing what so many do in kind of the campaign favor mode. I think he's putting in some very qualified individuals in those spots, and we're excited to get to work with them. And then the legislative session starts, and the State of the State address has been given, and the bills are a-flying.
they're piling up already. Absolutely.
Well, you have, on your end, approaching this new legislative session, have created your own new series at the Denver Business Journal. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's
this is exciting, and I applaud you for that.
Yeah, it's just a weekly column that's going to run every Monday morning. It's just looking at the week ahead. I mean, we've always said our coverage is not to do just retroactive assumptions of what's going to happen to business, but to get business involved. If you see an issue that you want to come down and talk about, you want to hear more about, we want to give you a heads up. Here's some of the big ones coming out for the week. Please come down. Please testify. Please let your voice be heard. And so that's our week ahead series. Will be running every Monday morning on our website, and hopefully we generate some crowds.
Well, I think not only just generating crowds, right? There's so many of the businesses that we represent in corporate America at the roundtable that have their own internal lobbyists and are part of associations and chambers that have lobbyists that may be somewhat in the know about what's happening. But that's a short and smaller segment of the Colorado business community. There's so many out there that may have a bill that directly impacts them, their business, on a regulatory side, employee side, labor side, go down that line, that aren't aware of things. And again, it's great to report on them after the fact, and you guys do a great job at that. But to kind of tip off that business owner and your readership and reach to so many people in the business community here in Metro Denver, that now may say like, hey, Thursday at X committee, I may want to pay attention or call my state rep or state senator and let them know my position or view on there, or go down and testify. And I think it's a brilliant idea for DBJ. I think it's so impactful for the business community. When you look at these types of shows that we're doing, these series and newsletters, it's all about education and telling people and making them aware. And so, I think for what you guys are doing, Ed, in that column and series and looking at the calendar and what's coming up and putting it out there, kudos. Phenomenal job.
Well, thank you.
I think it's going to be great. And, as we start to enter into this session and you start looking at leadership and the changes there, anything that really jumped out to you in the leadership election process on both the majority and minority House and Senate?
Yeah, I think the thing that jumped out to me was how different the two Democratic leaders are. I mean, you have Casey Becker, who is the House Speaker. She is overseeing a caucus of 41 people. I've been covering the Colorado legislature for 13 years. It's the largest caucus of either party I've ever seen.
Of
in the
either
House.
party.
Yes, it's
Period.
a 41 to 24 split. I mean, nobody's thinking about how many Democratic votes you have to break off to kill a bill now. You're just trying to figure out how can we talk people into making something better that we may not like. And Casey was the most prominent politician who came out in favor of Proposition 112, the oil and gas setbacks bill. She is an environmental attorney from Boulder. She's a pragmatist. She's not, just a wild-eyed liberal or by any means. She's the one that pushed through the Public Employees Retirement Association reform bill last year over the objections of the majority of her caucus because she believed it absolutely had to get done to save the state's bond rating. But she is very much on the we need to get more oil and gas regulations side. We need to get regulations in place to allow for paid family leave or pay equity. And so you see her coming from, I think, a decidedly more left point of view than you see in charge of the Senate, and that is Leroy Garcia. He is a Marine veteran from Pueblo. He is kind of your classic blue-collar Pueblo Democrat, not somebody who is very outspoken on causes like renewable energy. In fact, Garcia has voted against a number of oil and gas regulations in the past. He's more of a kind of your workers' Democrat, and has been very quiet on many of these issues so far. In his opening day address, he did not mention paid family leave. He did not mention oil and gas even once in his opening day session. In fact, he hit on things that were just very Pueblo-centric, like the opioid crisis. And so he is going to be in charge of a much narrower caucus. Democrats have a 19 to 16 lead in the Senate. And that means you only need to peel off 2 Democrats if you think there is something coming through that you greatly dislike and you want to kill. And Leroy Garcia very well may be one of those too. I mean, I think a lot of people have looked at the likes of Angela Williams, who's heading up the Business, Labor, and Technology Committee, or Rachel Zanzinger, who is sitting on the Joint Budget Committee as kind of the moderates in that caucus. But Leroy Garcia is right there and in a very unusual position of trying to lead a caucus that's shifted to the left in this election while he's really trying to lead it from the center.
It's been very interesting, and you mentioned Senator Williams, and I'd say the same thing about Representative Tracy Kraft Tharp, the chair of the business. On the House side, the outreach that we've seen within the business community is very, I think, noticeable. I think it's encouraging. I think it creates a little bit of hope and optimism in the business side. You look at Representative Tracy Kraft Tharp that has convened already colleagues within the business community, trade associations, chamber lobbyists world to start to bring people in. That happened earlier this week. Senator Williams is following suit on Thursday to do that exact same thing, to bring in business leaders and start this ongoing weekly dialogue or monthly dialogue. Senator Williams is running the Family Medical Leave Act with Faith Winter. Direct outreach to the business community. We can get into that bill as we start talking about the types of legislation that we're going to be seeing this year. But again, outreach, wanting to hear that voice, understanding the business community. So Senator Williams was at the Koga legislative breakfast last week and spoke very much like a mainstream Republican would about talking about the importance of oil and gas in her district and opportunities and mitigating that voice and being more thoughtful and pragmatic. And I think to great applause, obviously, in that community, but something that a lot of people wouldn't have expected from a Democrat leader in chairing that committee. And so I think as we talked about, and I know everybody has a little bit of guarded optimism or downright the sky's falling as you look at this whole new change and entering this year with the Democrat governor and the House and Senate and all the statewide offices. We've been very proactive and optimistic from the Business Roundtable of reaching out and starting that contact and relationships and having our voice heard and building the relationships with the new leadership, talking with Lisa within the Polis administration and Eve, who's running the policy there, trying to set up the kind of events like Moving Colorado Forward that we've done the last 2 years to continue that, to put them in a position to really share their ideas and thoughts. But more importantly, how do you leverage the business voice? And as you said, it's not the point now in the House where it's 1 or 2 that if you can flip a person here or there, it's going to pass. People understand that if they're set on passing legislation, it's going to go through. We do not have the voice to change that. But can we work with and establish a kind of relationship where they're listening, where they hear the voice of business, and maybe take a bill and pare some things down, remove some things, include some areas and some key frameworks or tenets of that bill that make it more palatable for business. And I think that's really the goal. I'm encouraged by the response we're hearing from leadership.
Yeah, and this is, it's worth noting, this is nothing new from Senator Williams. She first took over the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee in 2013, and she actually started this back then, where she had said when she took over, I want to bring in people from both sides, I want to hear their concerns, and then when I get to the point where I think I can see a middle ground, I want to bring them together. And she got a lot of praise for bills during the 2013-14 session that could have been very explosive. Remember, this was the last time the Democrats held all three levers of power at the Capitol, but instead were really trimmed down to be okay to both sides. I think particularly of a bill where unions and other labor representatives wanted the ability for employees in workers' comp claims to be able to see a whole host of doctors that would have really probably driven up costs. And she worked with both sides, and she got it down to an acceptable level where there was more selection that was allowed, but not a great enough amount where it's going to affect workers' comp prices. And those are the kind of things we saw from her. Now, I think it's interesting as you see, she almost seems to have a stronger voice this year, and I think that is in part because of what happened the next session. Mark Ferrandino let her go and ran a lot of bills through the Business Committee that were, business bills. Dickie Lee Hollinghorse became Speaker in 2015, and Angela was, at least now, is very vocal about the fact that she routed bills around that committee. She knew that with Angela Williams and Tracy Kraft-Tharp sitting on that committee, they could kill things that might otherwise get through that caucus. And so Angela's role was minimized. I think now that she is again in a position of power, she wants to make sure to say, look, I want that voice to be there. I really think it matters. And I think that's why you see her stepping up and stepping out in new ways this year.
And she is a small business woman as well.
Former, yes. I mean, she sold off her agency,
right.
but she knows how to run a business and what it means. So,
that both sides of the paycheck, right, as you sign that, and understands what that looks like. And while she sold that, I think she comes to the committee with that lens and framework and backdrop and understanding how what they do matters to business, right, and how important this voice and outreach and listening to the business community is as you're shaping things that ultimately may impact their success rate and ability to hire folks, pay folks, stay in business, keep the shingle and the lights on out in front. Talk a little bit about the minority leadership on both sides. Certainly no changes. Senator Holbert, Representative Neville staying in those positions. Certainly some changes below those there. You've got a Representative Van Winkle from Highlands Ranch now stepping into leadership. Some discussions about what is the right role, what is the right leader that's going to work with the majority. What does that voice look like? Do you want the hardcore conservative battering ram to oppose, or do you try and find someone that can actually moderate and work across? And so little discussions around leadership vote, but ultimately no change at the top.
Very much so, and that's very true in the House in particular, where Republicans kind of streaming off some pretty hard losses this year. We're looking at a leadership fight between Minority Leader Patrick Neville and Representative Lois Landgraf of Fountain. And Landgraf's approach was, look, we're way down this year. We need to not be the no party, but we need to be the party that engages Democrats. We need to figure out where we can find common ground, and if we don't like these bills, we've at least got to try to make them better. In the end, it was going to be a Landgraf and Jim Wilson of Salida slate that was going to run against Patrick. She decided not to. She said, look, we need unity. That's what's going to make this caucus this year, and we need unity. But it really is those ideas that are still swirling around out there. I mean, in an unprecedented level of minority, how do you work with the other side? Do you just say no to everything when a bill comes that you don't like? And we're going to see that really quickly with the ban the box bill that is coming out of the chute. This is the bill that would prohibit employers from asking on an application form if applicants have a criminal history. And this is one of those bills where most business owners I've talked to have said, look, I don't know that there's a middle ground here. The box is either on there or it's not. And you know, this is it's reflective of the question of, okay, do you work with this bill to try to make it better, or do you throw up your hands and say, look, this is going to hurt our ability to run our business the way we want to. We're just going to say no, and we're going to go in wailing and gnashing our teeth as Polis signs this into law. And so those are the kind of things you're going to see. The Senate is again, a different animal because of the closeness of the votes there. There was a little bit of change. Chris Holbert was the majority leader. Now he's the minority leader. But actually, it was Senator Jerry Sonnenberg that was set to step in and become president if they were to keep the majority this year. So Holbert is a guy who came out with a speech that was literally 3 times as long as Leroy Garcia's on opening day, and spent a lot of it talking about both the constitutional restraints on
Chris
the legislature.
Wouldn't do that, would he?
No, not at all. Yeah, this is not a guy who talks like an academic in any way. But also talked a lot about the comfort that he has looking across the aisle and seeing Leroy Garcia there, and really making that overture. Even though nobody is ever going to mistake Chris Holbert for a moderate, he is a very conservative guy, but he's a guy who says, look, we're going to work together, and I'm going to see what we can get done together on this. So, it's a whole new ball game out there. And then I'll just jump right into this because we haven't hit it yet. The third question is the man at the top. I mean, Jared Polis is coming into this role as governor with 2 reputations in some ways. One, on environmentalism, on healthcare, he is known as a very liberal person. He supports, a single-payer health plan. Not that he's going to implement it Colorado only. He doesn't like that idea. He wants it to come from the national government. And he's a guy who has supported measures for 2,000-foot setbacks before. But he's also a guy who has pushed forward bills to allow less regulation around developing industries, particularly technological industries, while he's in Congress. And a guy who has voted a number of times against big tax hikes that when the Democrats were in charge they put forward. And you're already seeing that. He comes out of the box with a plan for tax reform that would lower the rates for individuals, for small businesses, for even the overall corporate rates, but at the same point would get rid of a number of targeted tax breaks given typically to larger companies. So, I mean, here is Polis in a nutshell. He's doing something that businesses both going to love and hate in the same plan right here. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of questions still swirling about where Polis comes down as compared to his caucus. Is he going to be maybe a little more conservative than we thought he's going to be in the past in order to work and try to get consensus on things that show up on his desk? I found it very interesting. His first action on oil and gas this year was to ask for an increase in the budget for the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission that would fund 16 people. 5 of them would be inspectors, which is one of those things that you might say oil and gas, like, oh boy, are we really getting that many more inspectors? But 11 of them would be dedicated to pushing through the backlog of permit applications we have for drilling new wells right now. So, again, and then the first reaction for the Democrats was, that's a nice one, but we'd like more inspectors and fewer permit applicants.
Can we flip that number, 511, 11.5?
So already Polis is showing that he's not somebody who can be put easily into a box.
Well, and we get that certainly from the Business Roundtable side. Of course, our lane being a lot more of the federal and international side, right? Mm-hmm. And so working with Congressman Polis at that point on areas like immigration and trade policy and regulatory reform, and we see the business side of him and the pragmatic and thoughtful and the leadership space that he's in and evaluating and listening to business and listening to folks. In talking with his staff, they were very clear that the people that don't understand or don't know or are doubting are going to be surprised. They think that the bar is so low in their minds that they're going to shatter it. For those that are at least optimistic, they're going to exceed that. For those that have the high bar and high mark, they hope to meet that. But they're pretty optimistic that the business community looking at this governor will be pleasantly surprised on where they see. And you've talked about a couple things that, again, some of the business community in some areas is going to go, good for you. We didn't expect that. In some areas where he's going to come down on some areas that may be a little bit more expected or traditional from someone viewed from more of a liberal progressive lens. You talked about a couple of things, and I think as we get to closing this segment, Let's talk about some of those ballot initiatives. We talked about the election and consequences, but this state failed to address education funding and certainly failed to address transportation funding. We can talk about YZ and the impact and some of those other types of bills that went through or didn't, but in particular the two big 800-pound gorillas that people always look at in budgeting perspectives and our state's competitiveness, certainly human capital, talent, education. Our organizations came out and been as direct as saying the states, with the best schools will ultimately win and rule the day in the competitive space. And so where is Colorado rank on funding and performance and accountability and the ultimate product that we're producing for the business community? And was there a big significant lapse? What do we need to do in that space? And certainly with two competing transportation measures that seem more intent on killing each other's bills than passing either of them, it turned out to be a little bit of a weird dynamic in there with Caldera and the Independence Institute and the bonding that really angered and frustrated a lot in the business community, because the bills that as presented would have gone to the bonding this year too. That, John, can't we wait on some of that? Why are you moving forward here? Can we just take a little time out and let the voters act on one, and if it doesn't work, let's regroup year two? Did not happen. Neither of them were passed, and so we sit here with questions around how we're funding schools and sitting in congestion listening to the show at 4 o'clock on a Friday wondering if we're ever going to get home.
Right, and if you're looking at those roads thinking, I imagine the legislature is working on something grandiose, you're the most optimistic person in the room right now, because that's
fair enough.
that has been one of the issues, certainly over the first couple of weeks of the session, is we haven't seen that big plan to substitute for whether it be the sales tax hike or even the $3.5 billion bonding plan that failed in November. We have seen one effort come forward from Senate Republicans, from Senate Assistant Majority Leader John Cook.
I was going to say something, Cook. Yep.
That would add about $190 million in one-time funds next year
from
in
the
budget,
new revenue, right?
From new revenue to transportation. But I mean, even Cook acknowledges that's a far shot from what we actually need. We have an $8.5 billion.
That's like a bridge or a quarter-mile strip in today's dollars, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. that might keep the project going on I-25 between Castle Rock and El Paso County. But we have an $8.5 billion infrastructure backlog right now. There was some frustration after Polis proposed his first budget amendments that there was no mention in these budget amendments of transportation. That the legislature was looking to the governor's office to at least give them a roadmap, if you will, no pun intended,
or intended,
on how they should start thinking about funding this vital area, and he offered none of that. Now it's possible, and a lot of people keep talking about, look, I know the sales tax failed. We need a dedicated stream of funding. We need to figure out some way to get this through the voters, and we need a bigger picture plan. But to come out a couple weeks in and really not see any shred of that bigger picture plan, it lets you know how far apart or how difficult finding this transportation funding is going to be.
No doubt, and I think we understand that certainly from our side of the aisle in the business community and the Business Roundtable. We've hosted the last couple of years Moving Colorado Forward. Last week I was in the Speaker's office and the Senate President's office. We've sent emails over to CDOT, and we're going to be moving forward on that event in March. Hopefully the right time frame as they start to get in the new budget and the reports that come out and projections. Certainly, hopefully by then this issue is starting to percolate within the legislative process, and there's some ideas, and we can use that event to kind of allow the Speaker and Senate President, the new CDOT Director, the chance to really start to lay out their policies and procedures and how they want to address this issue, certainly from a legislative fix. But as we all know, it's going to end up going to the voters ultimately at the end of the day because of Tabor.
Absolutely. And Casey Becker, the Speaker, has also mentioned that maybe what we need is a combined ballot initiative that hits both education and transportation. She's worried that some of the reason that both of those measures failed, or all three of those measures in some ways, is because people didn't want to vote for two tax hikes and they had to choose between them. Now, I don't know that something that is going to be so massive as to be able to affect our education and our transportation needs is going to have much luck with the voters, who have said over and over and over again for the past 14 years on pretty much every topic, look, we don't want to raise taxes.
Tell me how many of those tax increases have passed in your time, Ed, over those 13, 14 years you've been doing
this? The last time we passed a tax increase, it was 2004. It was an increase on cigarette taxes. That
Which
tells you
is
where we are.
a great tax hike to have.
For sure, tax of cigarettes, darn.
We're going to have a quick break here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Check out the new series Week Ahead with Ed Sealover at Denver Business Journal. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. We're having a great conversation here talking about this new legislative session that's going on. I, again, have Jeff Wasden, Cobert President, here, and Ed Sealover with Denver Business Journal. So awesome conversation. You guys are like the sportscasters of politics in Colorado. I like that. Let's get going. I like this.
Yeah, I want to jump in, Ed, and you've been incredible in your coverage about talking about the types of bills that have occurred in the last sessions that were killed on a party line vote that now may move forward. And big topic areas when you start getting into healthcare and education, elections, labor laws,
oil and
medical
gas,
leave,
employer regulations.
Talk a little bit about what you saw looking at last year and what we may expect, and then let's get into really some of the bills that are already on the table, and we'll take it from there.
Well, before the election, I identified about 30 bills that pertain just to business or just to healthcare that made it through the democratically controlled House in 2017 or 18, died in the Republican-controlled Senate. And I think it's fair to say pretty much any one of them is on the table for coming back. We've already seen some of them. The aforementioned ban the box bill that we talked about. A bill like the Right to Rest Act, which would prohibit cities from Denver from enforcing their ban on outdoor camping, which essentially is a ban on the homeless sleeping in the middle of the 16th Street Mall when it comes to Denver. What we haven't seen yet, and I think this is where the opportunity for business to get its voice heard, is some of the bills that are being negotiated that aren't going to come back in the standard form they were in. And the main one we're talking about here is paid family leave. This is an idea that has died 4 times in the past 5 sessions. And it is one that says we want to put a fee on every employee's paycheck. That money is going to go into a giant statewide
it's a big pool. Yeah.
Yes, and essentially employees at companies that don't have or don't offer specified paid leave programs would be able to tap into there, get a certain percentage of their paycheck if they're out for 8 to 12 weeks to care for themselves after extended illness, such as giving birth, to care for family members during extended illness. And business has opposed this largely in the past because of the administrative burden they believe it would impose on them, and because they just don't like a one-size-fits-all policy being handed to them by the state government. There's no question that bill is passing this year. It's just a matter of what form it's in. And so business is trying to sit down with, as you mentioned earlier, Senator Angela Williams, who has not been at the forefront of this issue before, but stepped in largely to give the business voice to this bill this year, and trying to figure out a way that they could do this without it being overly burdensome, especially on small businesses. So I think of the ones that are particularly worried.
Impacted
if I have 4
significantly.
employees and one of them is out, what are the regulations around what I can do with that job and what I can't do with it? So we're going to see that come back. We're going to see a bill come back, and we haven't seen it introduced yet, but it's coming, on creating a statewide retirement savings plan for the number of businesses that don't have the capacity to offer a 401k or a pension. Not that I know anyone who still offers a pension plan. Then this would be something that all employees would be expected to participate in if they're not involved in their own local plan. It's an opt-out in past bills, not an opt-in, that would say we'll take a percentage of your savings, we'll put it into the state plan, the state will run it, and you'll have some sort of retirement savings. This is one, again, that businesses haven't liked because of the administrative burden on them. It's one that, frankly, the financial industry hasn't liked because it does in some ways set up a government-controlled competitor to the saving plans that they now offer. Now, admittedly, it's probably aimed at people who aren't going on down to Charles Schwab and knocking on the doors and saying, hey, how do I do this and set up my retirement?
Such an interesting thing. Just to jump in there, the Business Roundtable, we got involved in MyRA, came out of the Obama administration federally at that same exact thing. And so people are kind of going, where are you guys going to be at this statewide retirement plan? In some aspects, as you mentioned, you're not walking into Schwab or Fidelity or a
something
lot
like
of
that,
these
yeah,
groups there with your piggy bank with a couple $100 and expecting to be put on
You're
the
not,
retirement
I am.
plan. Well, sure.
Yes.
And they have a special room for you, and they'll put you in there, and they'll send in. No, we won't go. At the end of the day, right, this is not that same mindset of the planning and the groups. And so if you're using this as a springboard, an opportunity to really start to get the mindset, the culture of savings and building on there, to us, we think that's not a bad thing. That's probably something that is desired, but has to be done so in a way that minimizes impact to business administratively, the cost, the demands, the pressure, the time, more importantly, to administer that doesn't put a negative impact on an HR department that may only have one person in there trying to wear 18 hats.
Right, and this is, again, another example of business saying, look, I'm not opposed to this idea, the devil's in the details. In fact, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard the phrase, the devil's in the details, from both parties over the first couple of weeks of the session, because everybody has these ideas, but how is this going to happen? How are we going to achieve pharmaceutical pricing transparency without exposing corporate secrets of these pharmaceutical companies? How are we going to actually...
On the R&D side,
yes,
proprietary
exactly.
knowledge and information. Well, you mentioned healthcare. Let's just jump into that. Obviously, you look at this governor and really some of the things that he cares about. Healthcare, early childhood education, right? And they've both been, the marker's been set down on some of those. Certainly there's some discussion around the proposals about the all-day kindergarten, full day, and the impact upon schools. What is a one-time fund? Can you sustain that long term? We know with our work with Ready Nation and other groups, right, that getting people on that right footing to really bridge that gap on the vocabulary development and priming that pump as they start increases likelihood for success and graduation rates, and there are some tangible benefits. We want to see that kind of things happen from the Business Roundtable. That investment to us is worthwhile. It's a great, but to what detriment to the other budgets, and how do you prioritize that? And again, how do you make that work in with so many competing priorities right now with this legislative body?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got Polis digging into some of the healthcare issues that you mentioned. And again, here's the idea of we support this in general. Everybody wants to bring down the costs of health insurance and healthcare in areas like the Western Slope and the mountainous regions. And the mountainous regions in particular are some of the most expensive in the United States right now. But which details are you going to put forward on that? We're waiting to see the details still of a reinsurance bill. Polis has actually put this into his budget suggestion for next year already. We haven't even seen the bill yet. This is a program that was introduced last year, died in the Republican Senate, that has actually passed in a number of other states from Alaska to Minnesota. And the idea of reinsurance is that you're going to put a fee on every insurance policy in this state that is a private insurance policy. You're not putting a fee on Medicaid. And you are going to use that money, and this is a little bit like the paid family leave, to build this giant pool of funds. And when certain individual policies have a catastrophic health condition, such as cancer treatment, such as a really horrible car accident and the treatment that comes after that, insurers, if they've gone, say, over $1 million worth of spending or so, can dip into this fund. They can use that money, and they can use it till it hits 10 million or so. And the idea is that by having that backstop, insurers will not do the 27 to 30% annual increases in individual policy charges that we've seen over the last couple of years. That has basically made, being a single contractor impossible in Colorado if you care about having health insurance. But Republicans and business people are saying, look, I love this idea, but I don't feel like I should have to pay for everything. So where's the devil in the detail here? It's in the details of who exactly is going to pay for this program. These are the kind of things we're seeing Polis push really hard so far, and we're going to see a lot of discussion about in the coming weeks.
You've mentioned that word fee a couple of times, and for those that aren't familiar with why that's a fee and not a tax, certainly Tabor has been up and certainly on the menu this year moving forward. I think there's been a lot of discussion around Is there a statewide fix to Tabor? What are you hearing? What are your thoughts on that, Ed?
I don't see an appetite to attack Tabor at the legislature right now. I think what the legislature wants to go after is Gallagher. Gallagher is the 1982 state amendment that sets a ratio between the amount of, I believe it's 55% of property taxes must be paid by commercial property or industrial or some non-residential property, and only 45% are coming from residential. And what that's done is that's driven down property tax rates greatly. And in areas like Denver and the Front Range, where you see a lot of business property tax coming in, it's not that big a deal other than homeowners get to see their property tax rates driven down. In rural areas and areas that don't have a lot of business backbone, that means that those property tax rates are going down. They are losing funding for their special districts and their school districts, and it's not being replaced by businesses coming there because there's not the businesses there to tax. And the idea is that we've got to find some fix of this, or else we're going to starve out our rural communities, and not by having high tax rates out there, but by taking away from them just the revenues that they were promised to operate on. The idea that has gained the most traction so far is an idea that we divide the state up into 9-10 different regions for Gallagher. And so the reason rural communities are getting hit so hard is because Front Range industrial property values are going up so much, and home values as well. And this way, if, say, we're not seeing that on the Eastern Plains, they're not being forced to lower their property tax rates at the same ratio that Denver is being forced to lower its property tax rates, since they don't have that money to make it up for it on the Eastern Plains. That would still have to be passed through voters, and this is a tricky proposition, because remember, any change of the Gallagher Amendment is basically saying, hey, residential folks, we need you to pay more so businesses don't have to pay so much, and that is a tough sell on its face. But that's where they're going to start, and I think my personal belief is that they can get Gallagher reform of some sort through this year, then maybe you start talking about the Gordian knot, how to reform the relationship between Gallagher and Tabor and Amendment 23.
Yeah.
But I think this is kind of, let's attack one part of this puzzle first.
Another issue that certainly had a interim committee taking a look at this is the Simplify Colorado Sales Tax and the Sales Tax Initiative. It appears that this has got some significant bipartisan support, which I want to lead into a couple questions. We've talked about some areas where we think some areas are going to pass, and there may be some other bills we want to circle back to. We have not talked about oil gas yet, which is certainly a biggie.
Things that don't have simple bipartisan support.
Sure.
Yes.
But when you look at the Sales Tax Initiative, not only that one, and talk about that, but some other areas where you actually think that we'll get some compromise, and R's and D's in the House and Senate will be able to sit down together, and then we can come back to the biggie.
Okay, yes, on sales tax, if you're not a business person, you may not realize this, but the overlap of Colorado cities, counties, and special districts, all of which can have their own sales tax rate, has created almost 700 different sales tax rates, depending on which address you live
Taxing
at.
entities, yeah.
This was always a pain for businesses. It became an extreme pain to the level of, I'm worried about running out of compliance, when the state, Colorado Department of Revenue, I should say, issued its new policy late last year saying, now that we are requiring out-of-state retailers to remit sales taxes on their purchases, we're going to require all in-state retailers to admit that make money off of shipping and sales to remit to every jurisdiction that you are shipping to. And those small businesses, frankly, don't have the means to know, which four-way combo of a water district, library district, and arts district,
Special district,
am I
stadium
shipping
district,
to, and what is that rate? And so the first thing out of the box that is moving along is a proposal that asks the state to put together, they would likely contract for this, a system whereby retailers can say, here's the address I sent to. In fact, here are 500 addresses that I shipped to. You tell me what the rates are, and I will just send all of it combined to you rather than cutting 47 different checks, and the state will handle that. That is, everyone agrees upon that. But best case scenario is 12 to 18 months before that is in place at this point, even if that gets really quickly through the legislature. And so there are other proposals out there. Senator Rob Woodward, who's a freshman senator from Fort Collins, and who runs Subway franchises in 3 separate states. So this is a guy who knows how to deal with a lot of different sales tax rates, has put forth a bill that basically says we're going to apply the same standard to in-state retailers as we do to out-of-state retailers. You only need to remit sales taxes once you cross $100,000 worth of sales to these particular areas. It's unknown whether Democrats will go for that or not. It's unknown whether cities will go for that or not. And that's kind of the bigger picture. This is part of a story I did about a week ago. The bigger picture and in this is that there are still 71 cities that have home rule capacity of being able to collect their own sales taxes. And will they give up some of that power to the state? Will they be willing to say, oh, yes, we'll forego collections on people who aren't doing a lot of sales there? Because right now they could go to somebody who makes one sell into their city and say, you're going to pay the tax that you owe on this. There's so many moving parts to this, but I think what is certainly happening is both Republicans and Democrats hear the cry louder and louder that this tax system is the most convoluted in America, and we need to do something to fix it.
And certainly home rule cities, for those that don't understand that, is part of the makeup of your city and your guiding docs that help govern, allow you to do things like sales tax and certainly Tabor timeouts, et cetera, and push some of those things forward as opposed to municipal rule and others. And
we have an in-depth show on that, actually. If you look up Representative Tracy Kraft-Tharp, we did an interview with her, and she is part of the Simplify Colorado.
She is actually really the leader behind this as far as the legislative.
Good. Yeah, we're doing a great job.
So.
What other areas outside of trying to work together on the sales tax issue that impacts so many businesses in the states do you see Republicans and Dems sitting down together and pushing legislation in a bipartisan format?
I think one that you mentioned there, I think on education we might get a little closer this year, at least in some areas. For example, Patrick Neville came out in his opening day speech and said, look, we're not going to oppose full-day kindergarten in principle. And they've done that in the past just because of the enormous price tag, which Jared Polis has set at $227. $227 million that he's asked to put forward.
I may just pay that myself at the $227. That might be a great deal for our youth.
They'll find a way to work that out. There's still questions about, as you mentioned, sustainability, where the funding's coming from, etc. I think there will be bipartisan support there. I don't know how many other areas really are set up for bipartisan support right now, though? I mean, there's because, and that is in part because a wave election produces not just a new party in power, but it usually produces people from one particular part of that party. Let's think back to 2010. You know, the Tea Party elections didn't give us Republicans who were coming into the middle and saying, let's make a deal. They were saying, look, this is how we need it to be. And we saw that a lot, especially in the Colorado House this year. There are a lot more liberal freshmen than we've ever seen in the House. And so, especially in an area like oil and gas, there's no effort to start out the conversations with, hey, how do we find the middle? There's a feeling like we are being sent here by people who want change and massive change, and we're going to try to do that.
Well, you jumped into oil gas, right? And certainly there's a lot of areas around oil gas that are going to be up for discussions. Certainly the biggest being setbacks that everybody knows because of 112. But there's certainly a lot of other areas in the O&G industry around spills and cleanup and safety issues and methane and capturing and carbon that everybody's looking at. Obviously, in our space with the Colorado Business Roundtable, working with COGA and Colorado Petroleum Council and Colorado Petroleum Association and Denver Petroleum Club and all of our partners in industries and being on the Vital Board, we understand the importance, right? We are strong oil gas supporters, but we also take that a step further to say we're certainly in an all-of-the-above portfolio, and we understand not only the importance of oil, gas, but certainly the renewable space and wind and solar and why it matters, why we need to come together and create that diverse portfolio, be environmentally good stewards and responsible actors. And I think by and large, we're in this because we see oil and gas being such great partners and stewards and really attempting to be not only great to their local communities, to their workers, but certainly the environment, right? We see that. But as you said, Ed, that's not the discussion, right? The discussion is shut it down, keep it in the ground in these national movements. So it's hard to find those areas of compromise. And so with a great defeat in our world, right, of 112 last year, there was a very muted celebration that night because the realization is, okay, we also are going to have to be on defense come January, and the new Democrat-controlled legislator, and certainly Governor Polis, who's been a little outspoken on this particular issue, and certainly his vacation home and the big flare-ups around ONG and that area. So how do you see that playing out? What kind of areas and bills do you think are going to come forward? How much areas of compromise, certainly understanding where the governor is and kind of his priorities on some backlogs versus additional inspectors, which is an interesting way for him to jump into this from the gate.
Right. Now, I should say it is worth noting that before he came out and said, I want more permits to go through, he also came out and said, I'm very disappointed in a Colorado Supreme Court decision that came out. And I don't think you can talk about oil and gas without the Martinez decision, in which a lower court had gone along with a plaintiff who said that the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission must consider public health above all else when they are looking at permitting
first and foremost, period.
The Supreme Court threw that out. They said, no, that is up to the Conservation Commission. They can do what they want. You don't have to tell them what to do. And so, of course, the Pyrrhic victory in this is that as soon as that came out, Democrats rallied around the idea like, okay, then we are going to tell the Conservation Commission what to do. So we are expecting, and we haven't seen them yet because some of the authors are looking closely at the decision to figure out how to word this, but to see a bill that's going to come out and say, yes, the Conservation Commission must consider public health for anything else when they're permitting, and probably it will also say the Conservation Commission's mission is going to change. Right now, part of its mission is fostering oil and gas development in Colorado. There are efforts, especially from Senator Mike Foote of Boulder County, to throw that out and say fostering the oil and gas industry is no longer a goal that we want to have. We are going to see, in all likelihood, setback bills. We've heard 1,500 feet. We've heard 2,000 feet. There is a general sense that those are not going to pass. Casey Becker, again, the House Speaker, came out even as a proponent in the 2,500-foot setbacks in Proposition 112 and said, I don't think setbacks is the way we want to go. I don't want to touch that. I think we can look instead at public health, and I think we want to look instead at giving more local regulatory authority to cities and counties to do this. And that is Polis's focus too. Even though Polis has advocated for a 2,000-foot setback in the past, he now says, I want local regulatory authority. I want them to have voices at the table. I want them to be able to have some oversight on things like zoning that they don't have oversight on these right now. And I think that's where you're going to go. I don't know where the middle ground is on this, especially when you get to regulatory authority. That is such a broad, sweeping topic. Unless you can narrow down to here are 3 areas where locals can have authority that doesn't mess with the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's authority, you're still going to have a big fight, and it may just be what they're going to ram through rather than trying to find a compromise.
Well, and certainly from an industry perspective, patchwork is not the way to go. That uncertainty and trying to establish what local jurisdictions, regulatory environment and framework is going to be as opposed to the neighbor, as opposed to the county, as opposed to across the street, which may be entering into a new jurisdiction, certainly with fracking and horizontal drilling and being able to go miles and crossing, county lines and city lines and boundaries. It creates a very interesting dynamic for the operators to try and figure that space out. So we understand why that narrative is taking place around the local control, right, of allowing that self, identity and ability to create kind of what works for your community, but holistically, right, having all of these certainly patchwork, piecemeal pieces of legislation that would govern such a big topic in an area. How do you handle error? In those types of values and noise pollution and stuff from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, I think as industry is going to have a challenge trying to comply, and certainly the cost of doing business is going to increase on their side dramatically. And I think those are the areas where oil and gas is certainly paying very close attention. But I think wanting to work partner to listen, to be at the table. I know we're running out of time. There are some other areas on the national stuff that certainly could creep into when you start looking at immigration, and you start looking at driver's licenses in sanctuary cities, when you start looking at elections and climate change and some of these other areas that certainly have some to do with the oil gas industry, but certainly cross in a bigger picture. Any things in that area that you're kind of hearing or paying attention to, Ed?
Yeah, it's I don't pay attention to a lot of the immigration, so I know there are policies coming. I hear there's going to be some sanctuary state policies.
Heard that as well.
I've also heard that is not a popular idea at the top, that may also be going too far. But there will be climate change legislation, and particularly looking at reduction of carbon emissions. Right now, I think there are goals that people have. This would be setting them really hard into state policy. Again, where the middle ground is there, I don't know. But I think Democrats, in lieu of setbacks, are going to look to push overall carbon reduction emissions, which essentially is, skipping this first goal and getting to the bigger picture down there.
Yeah.
But
moving the goalposts a little further out and a little harder to obtain, but certainly putting a marker down on what's important to them in that space.
Absolutely, yes.
No doubt.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. This has
Tee
been
up
a
the
great
new series. I'm so
conversation.
excited to bring this.
Yes, absolutely. So we, again, Ed has his own new weekly article that's coming out. It's a week ahead in business. So look for that on Monday. That will be out. We also have a little sneak preview. Ed will be joining us once a month here on Connect and Collaborate. So anytime you type in Denver Business Journal or Ed Sealover, you can pop up all the shows that we've had with him. Thank you so much. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here, and tune in every day at 4. Thank you.